Hey, what is going on guys? Welcome back to another PS5 video. So we're still waiting for the release of an implementation of the new PS5 jailbreak for firmware 7.61, and in the meantime I've been seeing a lot of confusion, especially in the past 24 hours due to the release of another project that also targets 7.61. So in this video I just want to try and cut through the confusion and bring everyone up to speed on what's been going on and what the next steps are likely to be, and maybe answer some of the most common questions that I've been seeing, especially on Twitter. So we're going to go ahead and try and get into that here in this video. So to rewind a little bit, FreeBSD announced a major vulnerability in their operating system, and FreeBSD 11 is the same underlying operating system that the PS5 runs, and it turns out the PS5 was vulnerable to this. And this is a kernel level exploit, which is the kind of exploit that results in a jailbreak, usually on the PS5 or PS4. So a very significant exploit. Now the PS4 was ruled out pretty early on as it's not vulnerable to this exploit, but it turned out that Sony had already inadvertently patched this vulnerability in update 8.00, making 7.61, the previous update, the highest firmware that is vulnerable to this new kernel exploit. Now kernel exploits are again essentially a jailbreak for the PS4 or PS5 if you can actually trigger them on the console. So it didn't take long for the first implementations to appear. Fail Overflow posted an implementation on GitHub, which currently runs in a virtual machine that runs FreeBSD just as a kind of proof of concept. You can run it in that virtual machine. And then, of course, Flats also posted an implementation, or at least part of it, for BDJ. And then also a Lua implementation of the exploit as well that could potentially be implemented with some kind of save game exploit. So the important thing about a kernel exploit is, yes, it is essentially a jailbreak, but triggering that kernel exploit is difficult because the kernel is running at such a low level in the operating system. It's like the lowest layer, essentially, of the operating system, that it's not easy to actually get access to that code to trigger the kernel exploit. So that is where a user mode or userland exploit comes in, which is an exploit that can be triggered in user space, so some space that the user has access to so that they can run their own code on it, to trigger an exploit in the user space that can then break out of the sandbox and access that lower level code to then trigger the kernel exploit. So it's two exploits chained together, a userland exploit plus the kernel exploit, and that's what gets you the jailbreak. And that is what we've seen for most of the exploits that have existed for the PS4 and PS5 so far. They're normally triggered through a userland plus kernel exploit chain, apart from the pp-pwn exploit, the most recent exploit for the PS4, which does not require a userland exploit. So we actually have a number of different options for userland exploits on the PS5 that we can chain with this kernel exploit. There is the BDJ exploit, or Blu-ray Java, because the Blu-ray player needs to be able to run Java code, because some Blu-rays with the way they have their menu system or their bonus features use Java. So you can actually run Java code by burning it to a disk, so you can run your own custom code that way. And if there's an exploit in the Blu-ray player, which there is on the PS5, you can trigger an exploit that way. And that's how you can break out of user space and then chain that with a kernel exploit to jailbreak the console. So that is one way that we could do it. And then there's also a save game exploit. So if there's any game that has some kind of exploit in the save file, then some save files use Lua script for the save, and you can overwrite that Lua script with your own custom Lua script code to trigger the exploit when the save game is loaded. So that would be another potential way. And then, of course, the preferred method is going to be a WebKit exploit. So an exploit in the web browser, you can obviously run your own custom JavaScript code in a web browser. So, you know, a WebKit exploit would be the best solution overall. Because the problem with, of course, the Blu-ray exploit is that not everybody has a disc edition console. Some have digital edition consoles where you're not going to be able to run a Blu-ray disc and trigger the exploit. So that's the problem with that solution. The problem with the save game exploit is the same issue really with digital edition consoles, is that you probably don't have the required game on your console to load the save game exploit, so that will be a problem. So a WebKit implementation would be the best for everyone, because no matter whether you have a disc edition console or a digital edition console, you will be able to run the jailbreak all the same. And it's easier to update, and it has a lot of other benefits. So at the moment, we know that we do have a Blu-ray drive exploit. The Flow's BD jailbreak works up to 7.61, so that's why it's likely that that's going to be the very first implementation of this exploit. It may not be. They may just wait for a WebKit exploit implementation and then release the jailbreak, but it's likely that the Blu-ray drive will be the first method of actually jailbreaking the console with this. We already have a Blu-ray drive userland exploit already available. It's actually a pretty powerful userland exploit, so it could easily be chained theoretically with this kernel exploit to get the jailbreak. So that's why we're kind of expecting that the Blu-ray drive exploit will be the first implementation of this. As for the save game exploit, supposedly there is certain PS4 games or PS5 games that are exploitable, but we don't know exactly which one that is yet. So we don't know if, say, Flats, for example, is going to reveal which game is actually going to be vulnerable to the save game exploit, if he's going to release that information so that we could try loading the exploit through a save file. It wouldn't be the most convenient solution, but it would be interesting to actually jailbreak the console with a save file. And of course, if you have a disc edition console, you can just buy the game necessary to load that save game exploit. But again, you still have the problem with digital editions and WebKit. So as for WebKit, the issue with a WebKit exploit right now is that there's not any public WebKit exploits available yet. There supposedly are a couple that may be in private and perhaps will be made public in order to be chained with this. And of course, there are some WebKit vulnerabilities that could potentially turn into WebKit exploits with more research and development work potentially. And then we could hopefully see a WebKit implementation. So this is why we expect the Blu-ray drive will be the first implementation of this, most likely. It makes the most sense because there's already a Blu-ray drive exploit available that could be chained with this, and it would be easier than, say, a save game exploit, most likely. And then also we have a WebKit exploit, which looks like it is in the works. So, you know, maybe they'll just skip the Blu-ray drive implementation and go straight to WebKit if they can get a WebKit version done quick enough. Otherwise, we'll probably see a Blu-ray drive exploit and then maybe a WebKit version will come out sometime later. That's generally what we're kind of expecting at this particular stage. So it seems like a lot of the confusion has come from the release of this new update for the Mastercore exploit, allowing it to now work up to 7.61. Now, Mastercore is a separate exploit that's used for loading PS2 games primarily, side-loading PS2 games, and it works by exploiting a vulnerability in a save file of a PS2 game that you can run on the PS4 and PS5 called Okage Shadow King. You can use that game, modify the save file to trigger this Mastercore exploit, but all it's really able to do right now is mainly load PS2 games and apps and potentially emulators designed to run on a PS2. It does have the potential to go further than that, but the developer behind it, CTURT, left the scene before it was finished, so unfortunately it never got completed and it was never fully realized, so running PS2 games is about the best thing we can do with it at the moment. Now, the original repo for Mastercore does say it supports 8.0, however, that is not fully supported. So like you can do stuff like use the light bar changer to change the LED on your controller on 8.0 potentially, but it's not going to be able to run PS2 ISOs. So actually running PS2 games and using the main function of Mastercore is only really available up to 7.61 in EchoStretch's repo that he has updated himself. So there's been some confusion there about whether Mastercore supports 8.0 or 7.61. It's only properly supported on 7.61. Now, could this potentially be chained with the new kernel exploit for the PS5? Maybe. There's some speculation as to why it was updated to 7.61. I do know that EchoStretch has been working on updating Mastercore for some time now before this kernel exploit for the PS5 was even announced, so it may not end up being chained with the new PS5 exploit. So yes, there is a possibility that maybe Mastercore will be chained with the exploit to create the jailbreak, but it really would make a lot more sense to use any of the other methods really, because the problem with Mastercore is it relies on you having a retail version of Okage Shadow King installed on your PS5, a retail version with the license on the console so that you can run the game. And if you don't have that, which a lot of people are not going to have that game on their console, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So it really would make a lot more sense to use the Blu-ray method or the other save game exploit with the Lua script on some other PS4 game, or a WebKit exploit would make a lot more sense over trying to chain it with the Mastercore exploit in my view. But who knows, maybe that'll be some kind of passion project that somebody wants to undertake. So that is what we can currently expect with the PS5 exploit. Hopefully a Blu-ray drive implementation soon, maybe a save game exploit implementation soon as well, and of course a WebKit implementation at some point in the future. Could happen sooner or it could happen later, we're just not sure at this time. And as for buying a console that is going to be on a jailbreakable firmware, I wouldn't really recommend going out to try and buy a PS5 yet until we actually have the jailbreak available. Maybe a little while after that, so that we can see if we get a WebKit exploit relatively soon, because then you'll know if you need to buy a disc edition console or a digital console. Generally, I would always recommend a disc edition anyway, because it's obviously vulnerable to more exploits. The more exploits you have, the better. So disc edition consoles are always my recommendation, but we will not know really until we get the WebKit exploit, you know, how long it's going to be until digital edition consoles will be able to take advantage of the exploit too. And of course, once the jailbreak finally drops, we will have to wait a little while before we get things like ETA Hen and potentially the K-Stuff payload and Homebrew and all of that kind of stuff, because we need some kind of libhijacker equivalent to get around the hypervisor issue on the PS5, and that may take a little while to get implemented. So we might not be able to do very much initially when we first get the jailbreak, but soon enough we should then hopefully get the same kind of functionality that we have with previous jailbreaks on the PS5. That is pretty much it. Hopefully that kind of cuts down on some of the confusion that I've been seeing online there. Let me know if it helps, or if not, if it just confused you more. Hopefully not. But yeah, anyway, that's it for this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.